Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And I am very excited to be discussing the topic of this conversation with the wonderful Christopher Freeland, who has written this beautiful book. And if that doesn't pique your interest, I shall read out the title, Mysteries of the Round Towers: The Subtle Energies of the Stone Structures of Ireland. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you very much for receiving me, Anna.
Well, when I saw the title, I thought, ooh, this looks interesting. And your book does not disappoint because it is full of, I'm going to say, curiosities. Although it's much more than that. It's curiosities from the point of view that it really is something that I'm very curious about. There are so many things in it that I'm curious about. And not least of which, before we even get to the round towers, you talk about radiesthesia, which I think many people will know as dowsing. And
Yeah.
I've not had a dowser on this program before. So this is where I'd love to start our conversation today. Please tell us, what is dowsing and why does it work?
Um, as you can well imagine, there are lots of theories about that. Um, I, naturally enough, having a big head, I have my own theory, and it is remarkably simple. If, as I was educated to believe uh, or to learn as a monk in India, that all is spirit, it's a question of connecting. So we're constantly disconnected because we think we're a body and therefore we're separate. And that there's you and here's me. And so we create this separation. However, it's quite easy to overcome that separation by asking, I'm lost. I don't know. Can you please help me? You take your pendulum and you get the answer. And there's basically nothing that you can't ask. Just be careful. Can you handle the answer?
So it's, in a sense, we can talk about it as a form of divination. And, I seem to have this vague memory. And then I saw somebody do it recently that brought this memory back of women threading a needle and using the needle as a pendulum. Uh,
Yes.
so it's a very old form of divination. And the thing about divination is that there are rules, and the rules are around the questions. So, can you tell us more about the process?
Um, yes, of course. I've written quite a lot. I've written several manuals on radiesthesia. Um, but I think you mentioned something that is absolutely vital about the whole process, and that is the art of questioning. Um, if you have an ambiguous question, you're going to get a wishy-washy answer. So you have to be a bit of a detective. I point to my head. I don't really think the brain is there. I'm inclined to think the brain is there, or small intestine, but that's another story. Um, you bring together everything that you've got, and using your logic, you formulate exactly what it is you want to know. Um, and you then I very much follow the French dowsers of the 1930s. although I have gone off somewhat at a tangent subsequently. I very much follow their psychology, their methodology. However, they didn't call on the spirit aspect. Now, I'm not a spiritist, I'm not a spiritualist. I would flee that because I think we're going into fields which are not for us to meddle in. However, if we are sincere and we recognize that we have a very limited knowledge, then I think one is entitled, whatever it is, the superior intelligence, the God, or whatever it is that makes sure that bananas grow on banana trees and not oranges, and everything is beautifully structured. So you do definitely have a process to go through. And this is where I think so many people nowadays don't quite manage because they're lacking the discipline that you impose on yourself. You formulate the question in as tight, comprehensive manner as possible. You then switch off. And not many people can switch off. I find it remarkably easy because there's not much up there, but mainly because of the meditational practice, you can go into that neutral space where things are. Nothing more can be said. You repeat the question and then take your pendulum or your whatever it is, and you go into, you lapse into that neutrality, and the answer will come. That was my yes. That's my no. You decide beforehand, what is your yes? It could be like this, it could be like that. That's up to you. So there's nothing magical in this. As you said, you can take a thread and a needle. I don't have my most expensive pendulum in my drawer here, but it's a dirty old bolt on a piece of string. You can use anything. A blade of grass, so long as it can move. That's your yes. So I'm inclined to think in the caves in Lascaux in southwest France, there's that sort of wonderful picture on the wall of a hand. And then next to the hand, there are all sorts of animals. I'm inclined to think that there was one of the tribe who was a bit of a dowser. He'd put his hand on that hand and say, "Where's lunch?" And then they would go outside and perhaps using a stick on a piece, where's the herd of elk? Oh, over there. Okay, guys, come on. And off they would all traipse. I think it's been around for a long time. It's just in our modernity, we don't really like to admit that we don't know very much. And so ignore any rather strange woo-woo way to try and find out.
Okay, so we have a measure of what we're doing with dowsing, and obviously people can use dowsing rods or divining rods, or pendulums, and it's very well known that we can find water using dowsing. So I want to move to looking at the energy of stones, and the earth itself. What can you tell us about that? Because I think that this is one of the more, it's such an exciting subject. So I look forward to hearing what you've got to say about this. So
There's a nice old regular round river rock. For millions of years, it's been rolled over in a stream. And naturally enough, it's got a magnetism. Um, so you see it's going anti-clockwise. It's going clockwise. This is the negative magnetic polarity. That is the positive magnetic polarity. A sensitive person, especially you girls, you're much more intuitive than we are. You would be able to pick up probably from the temperature which is which. So, big deal. Now you know what the magnetic polarity of your rock is. So what? Well, I don't do the healing. God does that. But I interfere a little. And for example, rather than laying on of hands on someone who is very weak, you can give them a bit of a shock and it won't do them any good. If you ask them to put their left negative magnetic polarity on the positive magnetic polarity of the stone, they will get a very low field magnetic charge from the rock.
That's interesting. So is that,
isn't it?
is that true of all rocks or only some?
Probably all rocks, but like people, if they've been knocked about, they're going to lose their magnetic polarity. They've been smashed. You, a mason worth his name would be able to switch the magnetic polarity by hitting the rock with his hammer. You can do that. Quite why, I don't know why a mason would do it, but I've discussed it with them and I've done it myself. So it's like you're in the human body. Most men, right hand positive, most men, left hand negative. You girls, positive, negative. Come menopause, whoops, it switches, which causes the flashes. And I've experienced that. A black magician dumped on me and it was very, very uncomfortable. And I'm very glad I'm a bloke. So there is so little, there is no science as such of magnetism, even less of biomagnetism. We've just brushed it all aside and ignored it. So if science doesn't sort of take something out of its context, put it on the table, and say, okay, we're going to get stuck in and learn more about this, nothing happens. So you fall back onto your, oh, I wonder why I'm attracted to that. What is it that is drawing me in? And so,
I want to take you back to the reversal of the polarity in women once menopause or perimenopause begins, does that polarity remain, the new polarity remain, or does it switch back to how it used to be at some point?
At some stage, and this is no doubt a question of lifestyle, environment, at some stage, the positive polarity will move from the left hand and stay over in the right. But there can be several years of it switching. That's what is so desperately uncomfortable, because you feel totally disoriented. Your whole endocrine system is it's not functioning as it used to.
No, and that could account for why it's such a turbulent time emotionally as well, because that the energy, there's an actual energy shift that's happening. Okay, so
There is a very real energy shift which is not recognized.
no.
And so, this is a fairly substantial way of expressing the reality of magnetism in something simple like a rock. We've got it in ourselves.
So now we've got this idea that we have positive and negative energy. Stones have positive and negative energy. How does that interact with the Earth's own magnetic energy?
And I'm sorry, I'm going to pull you up. The negative, positive energy, I think we must be very careful with the terms that we use, because too easily we can say, oh, we don't want that.
No, that's right. We're not talking about that. No.
Yes.
We're talking about polarity here. Yes.
Yes. Now, irrespective of whether it's the Earth is a globe or if it's a non-spinning ball, it doesn't really matter. For billions of years, the sun has either been going round and round and round, or we've been going round and round and round. It's a dynamo. You're going to build up a huge magnetic charge. And that is the Earth's natural magnetic charge, I believe. And we are products of the Earth. And when you look at the Chinese, the yin yang, the yin Earth, the yang cosmos, we're the product of that. And so magnetism is a very integral part of us. And I do believe the ancients, as I mentioned in my book, were very aware of this, and they knew how to tap into it and apply it.
So now we come to the stone towers. And these towers, first of all, would you describe them, please?
It's a very limited, mainly to Ireland. There are 3 in Scotland, but there are still 63 standing in Ireland. Over 100 years ago, there were probably more. There are records which mention the existence of 100 of these towers. They are very strange. You've got in the top of a hill, in the depth of a valley, in the middle of the moor, a 30-meter stone structure, a needle. Just, what's it doing there? It's as if it suddenly has to have popped out. They have a varied number of openings. They have what is called the door, which is the larger opening, which will probably be about sort of 80 centimeters wide and maybe 1 meter 50 high. At Kilmacduagh, the doorway is 8 meters up the wall of the tower. I'm terribly sorry. That's not a door. How do you get in and out? You can't pull a ladder in. You could pull a rope ladder in, but how do you get the rope ladder out in the first place? Because it will rot in the constant rain and wind. So it is surrounded by anomaly. Some of the towers have been quite badly damaged, whether local farmers pulling bits of stone out to make his barn or whatever. But nevertheless, the ones that I've been able to access and the ones that I have read about all have a double wall. So you've got 30 meters of one wall and inside a second wall. Now, this again sort of defies all logic. Okay, you could say it's to consolidate it, to make it wind resistant and so on. But there's no instruction manual. No one left notes as to what it was all about. We don't know exactly when they were made. We don't know who made them. Of course, the Catholic Church moved in and took them over because that probably happened with the Christianization of Ireland. So as of the time of St. Patrick, which meant that they were there before that. And as a good proselytizer, you're not going to say, you're stupid. You shouldn't believe this. You should believe this. You're going to say, oh, these people are very attached to these towers. We must integrate them in our belief system, and like that, we can refeed them back as something else. And that's just what they did. They built their graveyards right the way up to the walls of the towers. They built their abbeys. And the reason I say all of this is because if the church had built the towers, they probably would have used the same structuring method to build the towers as they did for their buildings right beside them. And they didn't. When I say this, those towers, every single stone, outside wall, interior wall, is negative magnetic polarity facing up. So you're getting a huge drawing force or repulsion force.
I am somewhere in the recesses of my memory are stories, old stories, which feature towers that I think are like the ones you're describing. I'm thinking the first one that comes to mind is Rapunzel, where she's in this tower, very like the one that you're describing. And
Yes.
and there's no way out. We wonder how she got in there, because there seems to be no way out. She's just there. And it's only because she lets down her hair that, the night so they are there. I have a vague notion from medieval literature, the Grail stories, that there being towers
Mm.
mentioned of this type. But you're talking about them being built before that, well before that, which they would have been to have become part of, the lore
Culture. Yes.
and the culture. So I think it's interesting that you're talking about them having a negative charge to them, um, because they are rather phallic, which you might associate with
Yes.
a positive charge.
Yes. And there was, as I mentioned in the book, there was this competition organized by the Royal Society of Dublin. Um, and the guy who won the gold medal had just been elected to be a member of the society. And he wrote a really feeble paper for which he was given the gold medal and 50 guineas or something, um, claiming that it was the church. Whereas there was this young man, young Irishman, um, it's all in the book, I'm sorry, don't have his name to hand, who wrote maybe 250 pages. And this was in the sort of middle 1800s, where he really went into the most extraordinary detail of sun worship, phallic worship, and the possibilities that they were used by the Atlanteans, that the Tuatha Dé Danann. Um, he put a whole stack of information together and presented it. Now, obviously, there is no conclusion to be drawn because we just don't know. Um, but that is what we love doing, reaching conclusions and saying, "Oh yes, this is what's happening," instead of what the hell was going on. Because even today, in certain areas, especially when those towers are found out in the country, you go and speak to the local farmer. Oh, the grazing is great around here. Ah, you notice the difference between grazing here and where you generally keep your cows or your sheep? Oh, yes. To the extent there's one that even brings his cattle in a boat over to the island of Devonish and let them graze around the tower. And then he takes them back home again because the grass is so rich.
So now I'm thinking about other things like Cleopatra's needle, and there does seem to be this tradition of phallic tower type structures. Do you feel that there's a link between them? And if so, what are the others being used for?
A link in as much as every single needle, and how many are there? Again, I mention it in the book. There's a small subchapter uh, around that heading. There are very few that are still left in their original position in Egypt. And us French and British were very good at looting stuff, and we gave them away. And there's several in New York. There are a lot in Rome. Without being overly mystical, there is definitely the magnetic component, and it is the negative component at the top. So, and you've got a whole column of, it would be a bit like a crystal. a crystal wand. You know, they can be very powerful. And you're going to use that end to penetrate, to stimulate. You're going to use that end to, as in acupuncture. You're either stimulating or relieving. So I've got a feeling they might well have had that function. Now, as you know, the Egyptians are credited with having been remarkable magicians, and there's no reason not to believe it. But if you are in your sort of local environment messing around with these magnetic forces, you're quite likely to realize that you can take those forces and apply them. You can use them.
Well, I'm just thinking that we're still using towers, 5G towers, 4G towers, electricity, as conduits for energy. So I think it's very interesting that we think that our technology is the first to be dealing with energy, whatever form it might be. But what we're looking at is ancient technology that is acting at the very least as a conduit for energy, but using an awareness and a knowledge of the Earth's own energy and energy fields. So I think that is fascinating. Is there consistency in the type of stone that is used in these structures?
Not really. It depended very much on what was available. Generally speaking, I think about 60% of the towers were made using sandstone. There was a fair amount of granite, and as you know, those two are very hard to work. You can't use copper tools. Like the pyramids, you can't use copper tools to chip away. You've got to have something a bit more robust. What? I don't know. And various other stones were used, generally depending on what was available locally, because they weren't like Stonehenge, where they were going to be bringing in the stones all the way from South Wales. But who knows? So the quality of these stones, magnetically speaking, no doubt has an importance, but nevertheless, the key factor was which way up do you put it? And don't forget either, something that is really remarkable. Every single stone, because if you've got a tower 30 meters high, 5 meters diameter, you're going to have a rounded stone. They were worked. Each stone, with very few exceptions, each stone in every tower was rounded. So there was a very determined effort to make these things. It wasn't just, oh, look, there's a pile of rocks. Let's start doing a bit of Lego. Yeah.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, facing the outside is the negative charge.
But the first, so you've got your bricks, your stones, negative, positive. Second stone, negative, positive.
I see. So it's okay. So it's that way around rather than inside or outside. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting.
And both the walls, inside and outside walls, use this same method. As I mentioned, I've been able to get inside some of the towers. And the first thing I did was to check them. Is the polarity the same inside as out?
And it, mm,
It's
yes, because
intriguing.
I had wondered whether they had, made the inside different from the outside. So that answers that question.
No.
Well, Christopher, what a fascinating journey of discovery you have been on and have been sharing with us through your book and in this conversation today. It seems that there is a lot more exploration to be had.
Oh, yes, we've just scratched the surface.
One last question. Do you feel that there is a link between these stone structures and stone circles?
Yes, and I don't think it is a stone as such. I think it is water. I think it is subterranean water. Because if every single stone tower is located over the crossing of underground water, which is, according to the feng shui people, very, very bad sha. That's really bad news. 6,000 years ago, there's a stele that was erected in China. Don't build your house over the crossing of underground water. So A, they knew that that was bad news. And B, the ruler was concerned enough to make people aware, don't mess with that stuff. So the feng shui people don't have the remedy to deal with that. I personally think I do have the remedy using what I learned from the medieval cathedrals. I use a method of 8 wooden rods. You don't have to knock the house down and rebuild it. You can create an energetic environment which will evacuate that very powerful energy. The Irish were using it and transforming it.
So, are we saying then that these towers are like a release mechanism for the energy that is accumulating perhaps too powerfully where water crosses?
Possibly. Or we were harnessing it, projecting it through the openings into the surrounding countryside and benefiting nature.
Would that then account for the emphasis on the negative energy because it's linked with water?
Yes, it's very female, isn't it?
Exactly. That now is beginning to make more sense.
And as you know, that we've always, the dryads, the nagas, the wyverns, we've always considered the invisible force of underground water as something, and justifiably. It's an energy form that is simply not known and very, very potent. So if you can use it and apply it, we're in a win-win situation.
Well, it's triggering lots of thoughts, and I'm just thinking about where to go next with that. So then that's the case with the towers. How does that relate back to the stone circles then? What were they doing? Because it seems that the focus there was more of an astronomical nature.
Yes, definitely. There was astronomical observation, solar, lunar, setting your clock to find out when do we plant. But I believe there are all sorts of other potential applications of the circles or just the stones. Because again, as you rightly questioned, the material that the stones are made of, the property of granite as opposed to limestone or whatever, are different. So some of those stones, some of the standing stones, I know of several healing stones. You go and lean up against it, and then you get the most amazing recharge. It's phenomenal. The Boulogne stones, where you can work your black magic and get your desires accomplished, or your white magic. The stones with the holes in. It's a bit like going underneath a donkey's belly. If you have skin issues, allergies, go underneath the donkey's belly 3 times. Its stomach pushes out the most extraordinarily powerful frequencies. And those frequencies can sort out your skin issues. We are so incredibly unaware of all of the marvels that are out there.
Well, there's a thought.
Go get a donkey.
We need a donkey. Well, that's very, very interesting. And again, there's just so many questions that it looks like we need to be exploring. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you for your time today. The book that we have been discussing is Mysteries of the Round Towers. I'll be putting a link to it in the description box. And Christopher, if people want to find out more about you and your work, how do they do that?
Well, I have a website called radiesthesia.online. It's rather a mouthful, but there's lots on there. I'm very eclectic, having sort of studied Hindu philosophy, Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese. I do a lot of spirit release, a lot of ghost busting. That's my main activity because a lot of them are around these days. And that keeps me busy and off the streets.
Well, that's wonderful to know. So, given your very busy time, I am extra grateful for the time that you've given us today. Thank you very much. I'll be putting a link to your website in the description box as well. And thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It was most kind of you to host me.
And thank you all for watching. I'll also be putting a link to my own websites and my Substack in the description box. Until next time, have a wonderful week. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.